You're crammed inside a Sherman tank somewhere in Normandy, July 1944. The air is thick, a toxic cocktail of sweat, hot oil, cordite, and the raw, metallic tang of fear. Your commander is hunched over the periscope, his knuckles white as he scans the endless green walls that line every road, every field. These hedgerows, ancient earthen banks topped with a tangle of trees, vines, and thorns, stretch as far as the eye can see. They look like something out of a storybook, something peaceful, but you know better. On paper, your M4 Sherman is the perfect weapon for this fight. Reliable, numerous, mechanically sound. It's the backbone of the Allied armoured force, but your hands are shaking anyway. The real danger wasn't just what the Germans had waiting behind those hedgerows. It was what those hedgerows did to your tank, to your crew, to your mind. They turned your greatest strengths into fatal weaknesses. By the end of this, you'll understand the dark reasons Sherman crews began to hate these innocent-looking farm boundaries more than any panzer. After the chaos of the beaches was secured and the Allies finally pushed inland, commanders faced a tactical nightmare they hadn't fully anticipated in their war games back in England. The Normandy countryside wasn't the open, rolling tank country they'd trained for in the Salisbury Plain. Instead, it was a maze of Bocage terrain, a claustrophobic patchwork of small, irregular fields separated by massive hedgerows, some over 6 feet high and thick with centuries of compacted earthen roots. Military planners had seen aerial reconnaissance photos, of course, but from the air the hedgerows just looked like lines on a map, minor obstacles. They assumed their superior numbers and mechanical reliability would simply overwhelm any German defences. They believed the Sherman's strengths, speed, reliability, ease of repair would carry the day. The environment was supposed to be secondary to the equipment, but those hedgerows changed everything. They weren't just obstacles, they were force multipliers for the defenders and death traps for attackers. They were walls in a labyrinth where the enemy knew every twist and turn. Then the shooting started, and the paper logic died a brutal death. The Sherman had earned its reputation for good reason. In the deserts of North Africa and the mountains of Italy, it had proven itself time and again. Its 75mm main gun could handle most German armour it encountered, especially when using high-velocity armour-piercing rounds. The tank's mechanical reliability was legendary. Units could count on their vehicles actually showing up for the fight day after day. Unlike the finicky German Panthers and Tigers that often broke down or required complex maintenance, Shermans just kept running. Production numbers meant American units rarely fought alone. Where one Sherman went, 3 more were right behind it. German soldiers, who had learned to fear the sheer volume of American armour, had a grudging respect for the Sherman's ability to absorb punishment and keep fighting. But the advantage came with a bill, and in Normandy the bill came due. The first dark reason was simple and absolute. Hedgerows created perfect ambush conditions that exploited every single one of the Sherman's design limitations. Those green walls weren't just barriers, they were concealment for German anti-tank teams who could wait patiently for hours, silent and unmoving, until a Sherman exposed its vulnerable spots. The Sherman's periscopes and vision blocks offered only narrow, limited fields of view, completely inadequate for spotting threats hidden in the dense vegetation. German soldiers with Panzerfausts, the one-shot disposable anti-tank rocket launchers, or anti-tank rifles could sit mere feet from an approaching tank, invisible until the moment of attack. The hedgerows created hundreds of kill zones where the attacker was always at a disadvantage, forced into a fatal funnel. Imagine you're in the commander's seat, swiveling your periscope left and right, seeing nothing but green walls and a narrow strip of road ahead. Your gunner is scanning through his sight, but he can only see what's directly in front. The loader waits, ready with another shell. The only sounds are the rumble of the engine and the clatter of the tracks. Suddenly, without warning, an explosion rocks your left side. German infantry hidden in the hedgerow just fired a Panzerfaust from point-blank range. You never saw them. You never had a chance. And that was only the first problem. The second dark reason was how hedgerows transformed the Sherman's greatest advantage, its mobility, into a death trap. The Sherman's strength had always been its ability to move quickly and maneuver around enemy positions, using its speed to flank and overwhelm. But hedgerows created narrow, predictable corridors where movement was a straight-line gamble. Worse, when a Sherman tried to crash through a hedgerow, its low-slung front end would often ride up on the thick earthen bank, exposing the tank's most vulnerable spot, the thinly armoured belly. The Sherman's weakest armour was underneath, designed to protect against mines, not direct fire from an anti-tank gun. In Bocage country, this vulnerability became a death sentence. Tank crews learned to fear the moment their tank climbed a hedgerow, knowing they were completely exposed. A steel belly offered up to the enemy. You're in the driver's seat, following orders to push through what looks like a weaker section of hedgerow. As your tank hits the embankment, you feel the front end lift violently. Suddenly you're angled upward, 45 degrees, your belly completely exposed. Your commander is screaming something, but the sound of metal hitting metal drowns him out. The tank shudders as an anti-tank round penetrates your underside armour. The last thing you hear is the hiss of hydraulic fluid and the screams of your crewmates. And that was just the second nightmare hedgerows created. The third dark reason was how hedgerows completely neutralised the Sherman's firepower advantages. The 75mm gun on early Shermans required space to traverse and elevate properly. In the narrow lanes between hedgerows, crews often couldn't swing the turret to engage threats on their flanks at all. Even when they could spot an enemy, the confined spaces prevented proper aiming or use of the gun's full range. range. German tanks, by contrast, often positioned themselves in hull-down positions behind hedgerows, digging in so only their turrets and main guns were visible, while their hulls remained nearly invisible and protected. This tactical asymmetry turned what should have been an American advantage into a crippling liability. You're the gunner, staring through your sight as your commander frantically calls out targets. 9 o'clock. Panzer. You try to traverse, but your turret is already against the side of the hedgerow. It won't swing an inch further. 3 o'clock. Infantry with Panzerfaust. Again you're blocked. You're trapped in a steel box with a powerful weapon you can't properly aim. The frustration builds as you hear the impact of enemy rounds hitting your tank, knowing you could fight back if only you had room to move. But the hedgerows have stolen your greatest strength, and still there was worse to come. The fourth dark reason was the sheer psychological toll of constant hedgerow fighting. This wasn't a battle. It was a slow, grinding, mental breakdown. Unlike open country battles where crews could see threats coming and maneuver freely, hedgerow fighting was claustrophobic and relentlessly stressful. Every field crossing became a potential death sentence. Every hedgerow might conceal an enemy. This constant tension exhausted crews mentally before they even engaged the enemy. The inability to see what was ahead created a special kind of dread, a feeling of helplessness that no amount of training could fully prepare soldiers for. After days of fighting through the same green maze, crews developed a form of combat exhaustion that made them less effective and more prone to mistakes. You're hunched in your position, knees aching from hours in the same cramped space. Your eyes strain as you scan the same monotonous green walls for the 100th time. Your hands shake slightly from fatigue and too much coffee. The commander keeps asking if you see anything, but you've stopped really looking. You're just going through the motions now, waiting for the inevitable explosion that might end it all. The hedgerows have broken your spirit before the Germans even had a chance to break your body, and that psychological breakdown led to the fifth dark reason. The fifth dark reason was how hedgerows created a tactical adaptation gap that heavily favoured the Germans. German units, many of them defending their homeland, adapted with terrifying speed to the Bocage terrain. They developed specific, brutal tactics for hedgerow fighting, positioning machine guns and anti-tank weapons at pre-sighted key points, creating hidden firing positions, and using the terrain to channel American forces into prepared kill zones. Elite units like the 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend were masters of this, letting the lead Sherman pass before opening fire on the vehicles behind, trapping the entire column. American units, by contrast, struggled to develop effective countermeasures. Early attempts to simply blast through hedgerows with tanks failed spectacularly. Infantry coordination was difficult in the confined spaces. For weeks, American units paid a heavy price while learning tactics the Germans had already mastered. You're part of an infantry unit ordered to support a Sherman advance through what looks like a typical hedgerow lane. Your lieutenant is explaining the plan, but everyone knows it's the same plan that failed yesterday. As the tank moves forward, German machine guns open up from concealed positions on both sides. The distinctive high-pitched rip of the MG42, the Hitler's buzzsaw, fills the air. The Sherman, unable to traverse its turret effectively, becomes a target. Your unit is pinned down, unable to effectively support the tank or advance. You're caught in a tactical nightmare the Germans seem to have solved weeks ago. And that brings us to the final, most damning dark reason. The sixth dark reason was how hedgerows exposed the Sherman's entire design philosophy as fundamentally mismatched to this specific battlefield. The Sherman had been designed as a medium tank, optimized for maneuver warfare, reliability, and mass production. It was never intended for the kind of close quarters, attritional fighting that hedgerows demanded. This was tied to a core American doctrine, the tank versus tank destroyer concept. The Sherman was officially an infantry support tank, meant to exploit breakthroughs and fight enemy infantry and fortifications. The job of killing German tanks was supposed to fall to specialized faster tank destroyers like the M10 Wolverine, but in the hedgerows there were no sweeping breakthroughs to exploit. There was only a grinding yard-by-yard fight. The distinction between tank and tank destroyer collapsed. The M10s, with their open-top turrets and thin armor, were even more vulnerable in the Bocage. This forced the Sherman into a role it was never designed for. Head-to-head duels with superior German armor in a confined environment. The hedgerows didn't just create tactical problems, they broke the entire American approach to armored warfare. You're a crew member who survived North Africa and Italy in your Sherman. You know your tank's strengths and weaknesses, but here in Normandy, none of that experience matters. Your Sherman feels like a tool designed for a completely different job. You're watching German Panthers sit hull down behind hedgerows, picking off your comrades from a distance while remaining nearly invulnerable to your 75 mm gun. You're wondering why no one anticipated this environment, why your tank seems so inadequate for this specific fight. The hedgerows haven't just changed the battlefield, they've shattered the doctrine your entire strategy was built on. People say the Sherman was a death trap compared to German tanks. The truth is more specific and worse. The Sherman wasn't inherently inferior across all battlefields. In many situations, it was the superior weapon. But in the specific environment of Normandy hedgerows, its design philosophy became a liability that cost countless lives. The dark reason Sherman crews started hating hedgerows wasn't just that they created tactical problems, it was that they exposed a fundamental mismatch between American tank doctrine and the reality of this specific battlefield. The hedgerows turned the Sherman's strengths into weaknesses and amplified identified its vulnerabilities, all while forcing it into a fight it was never supposed to have. By August 1944, American units finally began adapting. Desperation led to innovation. Field improvisations, famously championed by units like the 2nd Armored Division, led to the development of hedgerow cutting devices. Welders began cutting up the steel obstacles the Germans had left on the beaches and welding them onto the front of Shermans, creating brutal-looking tusks or rhinos that allowed tanks to plough through the earthen banks without exposing their undersides. Tactics evolved to better coordinate infantry and armour in the confined spaces, with infantry tanks leading the way to clear the hedgerows before the main guns moved up. But these solutions came too late for many crews. The experience in Normandy led to significant changes in American armoured doctrine and directly influenced the design of later American tanks. The M26 Pershing, with its heavier armour and more powerful 90mm gun, reflected lessons learned from hedgerow fighting. More importantly, Normandy taught American commanders that technological superiority alone couldn't overcome environmental challenges without proper adaptation and a healthy respect for the enemy's ability to learn. That's the dark reason Sherman crews started hating hedgerows. It wasn't just that the terrain created tactical problems, it was that those problems exposed a fundamental mismatch between American tank design, philosophy, and the specific demands of Normandy fighting. The hedgerows punished the assumption that one tank design could excel everywhere, and that doctrine could survive contact with a reality it never anticipated, and the men inside paid the price until the lessons were written in blood and the adaptations were forged in desperation.